Hello, and welcome to this FStech Fireside Chat. I'm Jonathan Easton, editor of FStech, and today I'm joined by Rich Vibert, co-founder and chief executive officer at Metomic, to discuss empowering employees with robust data security to fortify financial services organizations. As financial services continue their rapid adoption of SaaS and cloud-based technologies, securing sensitive customer data becomes imperative yet increasingly complex. According to a recent survey, over 90% of successful cyber attacks targeted web applications used by financial institutions. At the same time, insider threats account for nearly 30% of data breaches. It's clear then that robust data security must extend beyond IT departments to equip employees across the organization. In this discussion, we will explore empowering people as the front lines of defense for financial data. Our speaker, Rich Vibert, co-founder and chief executive officer at Metomic, will share insights and real-world strategies that all financial institutions, large and small, can implement to strengthen their data security posture while simultaneously empowering their most powerful and scalable prevention mechanism, their employees. And Rich joins us now. Thanks for being here today with me, Rich.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan.
So to kick us off, can you say, provide some insight into why it's crucial to make data security a company-wide priority beyond just the IT team?
Of course. So obviously this is a SaaS applications, right? There's hundreds of them. All of us are using dozens of them every day, and it's a very different type of technology to what we're used to. They are used for productivity, they're used for innovation, they're used for file storage. They're vital for any business. For any business that wants to innovate, to grow, to be competitive in today's world, they need SaaS. They're incredibly important new parts of our tech stack. But at the same time, they introduce huge amounts of risk. For me, I think the most fundamental change that we've seen when it comes to SaaS is really the lack of a perimeter, which by definition, in some ways, is what defines security. It's where you protect the outside, right? You protect the perimeter. But when it comes to things like SaaS, where I can create a public link and share a file with you now, or I can introduce you to our Slack environment and send you a message, the concept of a perimeter is so much different inside the world of SaaS. It isn't just one big table of data that you're trying to protect. You're trying to protect something where there is no border, there's hidden corners that no one has visibility into. And to that point, IT teams, security teams, it's impossible to have pure visibility over not just even one SaaS application, but teams might have hundreds of SaaS applications. And so to know exactly what's going on inside of them, even that visibility part is close to impossible, let alone when it comes to having controls in place that prevents data being in the wrong place or accessible to the wrong people. So when the IT and security teams lose the ability to have this, they have to turn to the only other option, which is the employees themselves. When you distribute this visibility across your workforce, that's when you actually have visibility across your entire SaaS stack. So you need to empower employees in a way that's never really been done before.
And that's very, very astute observation, because there's this perception that I think that people only view certain employees as having access to vital data, and therefore those are the ones which need the most kind of intense oversight or scrutiny. But ultimately, every employee interacts with sensitive data and therefore can be a potential weak link that compromises security.
Absolutely. And as a heavy SaaS users ourselves at Metomic, it's not just who's uploading data. So all it takes is for one person to have access at, let's say, the root cause, where data is coming from in the first place. So maybe a customer success agent that's speaking with a customer. That data, once it lands in a SaaS environment, then it comes down to who has access to that SaaS environment. And these SaaS environments, by default, are usually accessible to your entire company, or at least your entire team. Beyond that, these SaaS environments are making it really easy for us to collaborate externally. So we can toggle stuff to say, let anyone with the link have access to this folder, or share externally with someone else's email address. So it's not, what's happening is there's only a few people in the organization that might have access to the sensitive data in the first place, on the front line, let's say. But once it's into your SaaS environment, all of a sudden it's accessible to not just a dozen other tools, but potentially hundreds of other people, internal and external to your business.
So at that intersection of technology and human involvement, what's the next step? What strategies can be employed to cultivate a human-centric approach to data security that makes employees the frontline defenders against data leakage?
Of course. So when we talk about the perimeter of SaaS is disintegrating, it doesn't exist in any form of what we know as a perimeter and what we've got very used to protecting in the past. We have to take different strategies. We have to take different strategies, invest in new tools, do things differently. And what we have to rely on is we have to go right to where the data is, right to the data layer. And the data layer is the intersection of employees and the data itself. So whether it be employees uploading data, sharing data, moving data, we have to take security right to that point. We can't no longer rely on just simple things like making sure we've got SSO and making sure the configurations of the app's fine. We have to go all the way to this data layer. And this is what we call the human-centric approach to security. So how do you enable the front line? How do you enable this layer of your employees and the data? And at the end of the day, just to be frank, employees, they've got their own jobs to do. This is gonna be secondary to them. So you need to engage them in very different ways that are different to a Word doc policy that I sign on my first day, that I sign and may not fully read, certainly not fully remember, to say that I'm not going to do this and I'm going to do this. You have to take a new form of engagement with the employees to make sure that they're treating sensitive data in the right way. This new form of engagement takes a few things. One of them, it has to be in their favorite, where are they collaborating with their colleagues? Tools like Slack, tools like Teams, tools like Google Chat, go right to where they're used to being engaged with, right, in these tools. Secondly, it needs to be real time. So it can't be things like what happened this month. It needs to be right in the moment. An employee uploads a file that contains custom data. There and then they should get a message. Hey, you just uploaded a file that contains custom data. Did you mean to do that? And finally, this is the final piece, giving them the controls in these notifications to remediate their risks, not just the education part, but the control part as well. Trusting your employees to say, I didn't mean to upload that file, or I wasn't aware that we couldn't upload files in that certain location. So you give the employees real-time visibility in their favorite places where they're used to spending time. And within that, the controls to remediate their own risks, whether it be today, tomorrow, the next day, give them the controls to remediate their risk once the job has been done.
I suppose as well, a key part is, as you say, making everything frictionless. And, you know, there is a tendency, I think, for people to treat security like an obstacle. And as such, it can often risk getting ignored or circumvented. So, like you say, it's really important to have those systems in place which are kind of judgment free, that do have security at the heart of it, but it doesn't necessarily need to be at the forefront of everything the employees are doing.
Exactly, and it's not about messages saying anything was done wrong. It's about fair education. You've got to be aware that SaaS applications are developing new features every day that make it easier for employees to make mistakes, and you have to treat it that way. You have to assume that there wasn't malicious intent behind every sensitive data sharing activity. So companies need to be aware of this. They need to give notifications that have controls, that are friendly, that are done in new ways to how things have always been known in security. And what we see, particularly, Jonathan, which I find fascinating, and I think this is going to be one of the biggest game changers, is employees are very happy and grateful when they've been told that they did something that they weren't meant to do, right? Especially in a friendly way, and they don't seem judged in the process. They learn, they know that they can't do it again. And this is the easiest way to sort of like educate on the front lines. It's never can be done in these like old approach of like, even some long form videos or documents. These real-time notifications make employees aware of what they can and can't do. And they like that. They like that real-time education.
So you touched on it a bit there, the aspect of potentially uploading a file and then getting a notification up. But what can you go into a bit more detail into what role automated security policies can play in empowering this human firewall, and a little more detail on how they
Yeah.
work in practice?
Yeah. So in practice, this is a great question. So in practice, what does this look like? This looks like, let's say, Jonathan, you and I are working together. Maybe I'm in the customer success team, and you're in another department. We use, for example, we're very active users of the likes of Google Drive. And what might happen is I take a customer support transcript and I upload it into Google Drive, or I send it to you because I need maybe support or something like that. And I send it to you via the likes of Google Drive. Not everything's done over email now, right? There's different ways to communicate with it. You can do a lot of in-app communication. So I can communicate with you in-app via tools like Google Drive. And when I might upload a chat transcript that contains sensitive data like the customer's phone number, the customer's email address, maybe their address, or even just details about themselves, which would be classified as PII, which they shared in order for me to help them solve their problem. What would then happen is I would get a notification via one of our favorite tools like Slack. So a Metomic notification would pop up inside Slack to say, hey, Rich, a moment ago, so literally in real time, milliseconds ago, you shared a file with Jonathan that might contain customer data. We noticed that it had email addresses and phone numbers and so on. And directly within this notification, Metomic is giving me the controls to say, okay, remove the access from Jonathan, or take away the sensitive parts of that message, or remind me tomorrow so that Jonathan can do his job with this transcript. But at the end of the day, it then gets cleared up afterwards, so we don't leave the risk hanging around inside our things. And as I was saying, these notifications aren't long, detailed texts about like how to do things, and it's a really long read. It's simple to understand, and it gives you a link directly to the file so that I can say, oh, that's interesting, there's the file, and I can even just change the permissions there and then inside this file. So that's just one example, and this goes across all of your favorite SaaS applications, Zendesk, Jira, Trello, Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, even newer tooling like GenAI on ChatGPT on the browser, right? I might accidentally load some sensitive data into these prompts so that I can make my emails better on ChatGPT, for example. Metomic's delivering these real notifications to basically say, did you mean to do this? And if you didn't, then here's some really easy ways to remediate this risk. And by the way, you might now know in the future that this is how we do things and how we can't do things.
I suppose ultimately it boils down to the automation providing protection while freeing up employees to focus on their core responsibilities.
Exactly.
In the aspect of, it doesn't have to be a burdensome thing for someone to think about, oh, I need to share this file with a client, but I'm not sure whether it contains data I'm not allowed to share. So you bounce it off a couple of people, all of that's taken out of your hands.
Exactly. And this is one of the things that the security teams, entire companies might not understand is the barriers, so the obstacles that you're referring to. Employees might be reluctant to do some of these things, right? Some of this, maybe I'm trying to share this file with you, but and that would really aid not just the business, but our customer, because it allows me to get back to them sooner. But a lot of employees are reluctant because they think, oh, am I allowed to do this? Am I not? They don't know where to find out if they know how to do this or not. So they feel more liberated to get the best use of SaaS applications because they know that there's this tool in the background that's making sure that sensitive data is being shared in a secure manner.
Particularly in financial services where, any one, the regulatory requirements are so much higher than in a lot of other industries that, putting out the wrong kind of data can lead to, huge fines and things.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's about minimizing the problem. It's not about, at the end of the day, it's a very challenging environment, right? The new cloud environment is a very challenging one to know exactly what's going on everywhere, and to prevent everything, you essentially have to shut down all use of cloud, which is impossible to compete. So it's about minimizing the risk and understanding, having the visibility over where are the risks in the business, how can we control them, how can we get better? And this is around this whole conversation we're having. The way to get better is by empowering the human firewall to enable employees to take care of their own risks as well, not just leaving it in the hands of alerts and the security team.
One thing I want to go back to, something I mentioned in the introduction, that insider threats account for nearly 30% of data breaches, and insider threats have always been such a kind of, particularly in financial services, always such a hot button topic. What are some examples of common insider threats that you've seen, whether intentional or unintentional, that you can share?
Yeah, many. So it's a very hard problem to solve, right? I mean, I'll share with you. Okay, so two unintentional ones we see frequently, and one intentional one. So the two unintentional, one would be, these are just two examples out of many, but the two I'll share is, so for example, in financial services, KYC, know your customer, is an important part of any financial services company that needs to have an account opened to onboard customers and so on. Typically in financial services, I need to share my passport with you, maybe my proof of address and many other things. So these KYC documents are filled, they are arguably some of the most sensitive data you can have, right? My passport photo might be the most sensitive data that I have. My address, I'm really telling this company everything there is to know about me. So in that process, I'm giving a lot of sensitive data to this business, and I might need support in being onboarded. So this goes back to the example that I was sharing with you. I give these documents, and this leads me into my second example. The customer success team, in helping me onboarded, maybe I've been blocked in my onboarding process, might need to communicate across the business regarding my particular account being opened. So particular parts of my account opening process and the data that I've shared might suddenly end up in different parts of the organization. It might be connected to different tools. It might end up in another department. And so what you're essentially seeing is, slowly data's been gone into one place. I shared it originally with one sort of in part of this process, and next thing you know, it exists in dozens of places and accessible to hundreds of people. So
really
that's one
without having any kind of visibility.
There's no visibility over where it goes. There's no let alone the controls to then, take that data back afterwards, right? So next thing you know, you're building up piles of data in places where you didn't really intend it to be in the first place. And that's what I was saying. This is an unintentional, non-malicious act. It's just a team helping me get onboarded as a new customer, right? Which is ultimately what I want to do. On the other side, one of the things that we see that's intentional, that's problematic to a lot of businesses. In today's world, we're talking about the rise of SaaS applications. There's obviously many trends in how the workforce generally operates today, and one of them is employees don't stay around at companies for as long as they used to, right? It's not 20 years anymore. It's more like 1, 2, 3, up to maybe 5 years is sort of maybe the common tenure. And so when employees leaving companies, they have such a rich source of data that's accessible. And I'm not saying all of it's intentionally malicious in a really bad way, but it's so easy to download previous materials that are being used in the company, or maybe it's some form of customer data. You just have to go to these tools and click a download button. Almost every SaaS tool's got a download button. And next thing you know, it's downloaded to your personal laptop, and you can email it to someone else. You can do whatever you want, especially in the remote world. It's harder to have control over that thing. So what we do see is employees that might be leaving a company taking forms of data with them. And there's ways that security teams, compliance teams can have more visibility over that, because they obviously know when an employee might be on their notice period or in their path of exiting the company. And when they know that, they maybe have a higher level of visibility on this particular person, right? So they can monitor more closely what might be going on. So that's one of the more intentional things that we see. I'll finish by saying, independent of non-malicious or malicious, one of the biggest controls of this, one of the biggest ways to solve this problem, isn't trying to think in detail about every single possible use case of non-malicious and malicious activity. the biggest lever that we see being pulled, especially when you're starting off on this journey of trying to secure sensitive data in SaaS, is minimizing sensitive data, minimizing where it exists inside these environments. Because almost by definition of SaaS, which is a very transactional game, right? I send you a message today, that message doesn't need to be there tomorrow. It's minimizing the sensitive data. So it's keeping control over where is sensitive data being shared, and applying things like retention periods to make sure that data is being redacted every day, every week, every month, to keep your systems clean. And what I mean by that, how does this solve these insider threats, is there's less data to either accidentally be leaked or purposely be leaked as well. So really minimizing the surface area is a key strategy to solving this problem at its core.
So in this conversation, we've talked about a lot of different things, and a lot of different ways that software or SaaS tools can be used and abused, and they can be opens institutions and organizations up to a lot of issues with data security. Taking your Metomic hat off for a second, what characteristics should financial services firms be looking for in a data security solution, and why?
Of course, yeah. So take my Metomic hat off for sure, because this is what I'm fascinated by and very passionate by. It's as I was saying right at the beginning of our conversation, Jonathan, it's a new game, in my opinion. SaaS is such a different environment. I don't think we can just apply existing solutions to this world. It's not a database. It's a very different type of collaborative, real-time, transactional, fast-moving environment that, by the way, we haven't mentioned yet. In a lot of cases, these tools are built to collaborate or store sensitive data, right? Whether it be a customer support ticket or a file, they are built to have some sort of access to sensitive data. So the first thing that I think is absolutely critical is not all sensitive data is risky. You can't say, let's find all the customer email addresses and say all of those are bad. In fact, when we look at SaaS, a lot of customer email addresses that are being shared inside the SaaS application, shared or stored or moving, are typically safe and fair and just part of doing business. And it's been communicated to the client that this is what should be done, and there's nothing bad about it. So the first thing I'll say is it's about finding that line between what is actually safe, normal sensitive data sharing, and what is a risk. And that requires extremely complicated technology that not just Metomic, but other companies are working on. It's about how do you find the risks in this very vast ocean of sensitive data sharing activities. It requires a lot of attributes that aren't like just looking at the data point and saying a credit card's really bad, but an email address is okay. It's about looking at what time of day was this sensitive data shared, who was it shared with, how much data was shared at the same time, is that employee on the notice period, for example. So it's feeding many, many attributes in to find that line between what is not a risk and what is an actual risk. That's the first thing that I think is absolutely critical. The second thing is the world of alerts, which obviously is a really cool part of security. It's something bad happened, get an alert. It's very difficult to work in this game. There's so much sensitive data being shared. There's risks being created all the time. Having a very small security team, which is often under-resourced anyway, just receiving alerts, what do you end up with? You end up with an alert every second. They're impossible to manage. They're impossible to deal with. So it doesn't work. And this goes back to what we've been talking about, which is the human firewall. You have to distribute these alerts to the employees themselves. It's the only way to handle these alerts at scale. Otherwise, I think trying to solve this data security and DLP problem inside SaaS is impossible if you don't enable the workforce, if you don't trust them and enable them to control their own risk. Alerts are still crucial. You need the logging and you need the alerts when maybe super highly risky data is being shared at certain points, but you need to empower the employees themselves. You need to enable this human firewall. So I think those are the two things that I think any FS firm should be looking at when thinking, maybe we're sharing too much sensitive data on SaaS, which might be leading to the possibility of data leaking or potentially failing a certain compliance, so to speak.
And as well, what we've talked about throughout this conversation is having a solution which is kind of seamlessly baked into employees' workflows.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it needs to be one tool that's across your entire SaaS stack, right? It's not, let's use one tool to secure Teams, let's use one tool to secure Box, and a dozen of others. Again, it won't solve the problem. You have to have that holistic visibility and control across your entire SaaS stack. And as you're saying, this real-time, dynamic, friendly, and modern communication directly with the employees themselves.
Mm. Well, I think that's the perfect way of wrapping up this latest FStech Fireside Chat. I'd like to give a huge thanks to Rich Vibert, co-founder and chief executive officer of Metomic, for providing us with his expert and actionable insights, and to you for watching. For FStech, I'm Jonathan Easton, and we will see you soon.